obviously, if you want to follow along, we're going to be in Genesis, the early part of Genesis. I was talking to someone the other day, and they were asking, hey, what are you teaching on? And it's going to be, I think it's going to be Noah and the flood. One of the other ones kind of bouncing around my head was Jacob. He wrestles with God, wrestles with the angel. And sometimes he was like, oh, I really like the New Testament. I said, oh, me too. That's usually where I am. The Gospels, following Jesus around. Probably my favorite place to teach from. The letters, of course, for us. And so I'm actually trying to make myself go back and do some of the Old Testament stuff as Don is teaching kind of the broad Bible on Sunday mornings. So we're going to be here in this text. You heard read for us, and I want you to read this with me, all right? Read along with me. For God is not a God of disorder, but a God of peace. Okay? And the Apostle Paul was one of Jesus' followers kind of after Jesus' immediate time. And he wrote much of the New Testament. So he's a pretty big name in the New Testament. And he writes this to the believers in Corinth, the city. That's why it's named, this letter is named 1 Corinthians. And so he's writing to them, and he's telling them, hey, I want to teach you about something. And I want you to know, and he's talking to them about order in the worship service. Hey, don't get crazy. You guys are running crazy, and it's stressful, and it's causing problems. And that doesn't reflect God's nature. It doesn't reflect God's nature, right? I think sometimes we border, right? We push that line, I think, right here in Wellspring Fellowship, all right? But they were talking about much, much worse things. Sometimes we think, he's a God of order, so we should do things in order. We think that means sit on our hands and be quiet. He said, oh, if this wasn't a mixed crowd, I would tell you the things that Paul was trying to correct, okay? He was saying none of that stuff in church. God is a God of order. But I think we also see this, and this is where we'll be, Genesis chapter, it's really chapters 6 through 9. But we're going to focus in on about half of that, okay? We're going to focus in on half of that. I wish, and I thought about it, letting Jonathan read the whole story to us. I'm trying to figure out more ways to make that Bible reading time more full, where we really just sit in front of the Word. Now, I know you have a copy of that Bible. If you don't, we can fix that. And so I hope you'll read this at home, all right? 6 through 9, bigger than 5, but smaller than 10. Genesis 6 through 9. And it's early enough in Genesis, if you forget the numbers, just start in the very beginning. And this is basically the third story of the Old Testament. All right, so let's put it in context, because I think that's what matters. Sometimes we look at the Bible through a microscope, and that's right. We want to get down to the nitty-gritty of that. Our kids, are starting biology, so they have a microscope, and they're looking at things, and it's like, we're eating that. When you look under a microscope, you can see things, right? And so sometimes we look at Scripture through a microscope, and that's right. We get down in the nitty-gritty of it. We want to see the details of it. Sometimes we need to look at it from far off, and that gives us a new perspective. Again, that's part of what Don is doing as he's teaching our Sunday morning adult class, is kind of this high flyover. Sometimes we get lost in the stories, and we forget that Star Wars number 4 is actually just one episode in a great epic, right? In this great adventure of good and evil. Darth Vader was Luke's dad. Who would have guessed? And it was interesting as we were watching this with our kids, that we were saying, no, see, whenever we were watching this for the first time, we didn't know who that was. And we didn't know who Anakin would be later and those kind of things. I hope I'm not spoiling anything. It's a pretty old series, okay? And so I want to back up a little bit. So we're gonna kind of skip along the surface of chapter 6 through 9, okay? So let's drop down into verse 9 of chapter 6. So I want to hit it from the text, and I hope you will study it from the text. At the same time, I think it probably does as much good or value or honor to the story if I would just memorize it and then kind of just tell it in a very modern way. That there are some of the details there that modern minds hear, and whenever modern minds hear a story, we ask modern questions, right? Is that accurate? Does that add up? Does that make sense scientifically? And I'm not saying that's wrong. The only thing is this is not a modern story. In fact, it's at most conservative views, it's several thousand years old. At the writing of the story, and it had probably been told orally for generations and generations, and so it's almost, if it wasn't 90 degrees and 90% humidity. It'd be better, we could start a campfire. We would all gather around on the beach, and someone would say, "Oh, Uncle David, tell us the story about Noah." And it would go something like that, right? And depending on whether it was about to rain or not, whether the bell rang on the fish pole or not, it would depend how I told that story. And it really wasn't down in the details, but there was still something happening that was big. When you watch Star Wars, is anyone who is enough of a sci-fi geek that you're going, can you really fit that many TIE fighters in an Imperial starship? We would look at that person, right, and go, "Oh, you're missing the point of the story. It's good and evil inside of Anakin and Darth Vader, and in the end, good wins, and there's this battle, and sometimes the good guys get the upper hand, and the rebels have to go hide on an ice planet, right? And then there are times where the Empire strikes back and blows up the Death Star. And so there's this great epic that unfolds with all these little stories, and this is one of the stories. The question I want you to ask, and I'm kind of setting it up from the front, I'm telegraphing my pitch here, okay? What's it about? It's about a God of order. And I think it's about many things, but what I want you to do also, I want to tease you or invite you, bait you into interpreting Scripture on a deeper level. I want you to go, what is it about this story? And think about this, that God's people, later known as the Jews or Hebrews, not at this time, they had certain stories. There were more stories than the creation story and the story of Cain and Abel, and then now we get to the third story, the story of Noah and the great flood. There were more stories than that. Why? What's special about this story? That God's people would tell it generation after generation after generation. Why not the story about how Uncle Eleazar fell off the donkey? That might have been a funny one, and maybe it broke up the stories they told around the campfire, right? But why this story? What is it about it? What is it about God? What is it about the story where God has His hand, whatever that looks like, in preserving this story for us? My guess is this may be the oldest story you ever read. Are you into ancient literature? Do you read other Babylonian literature of the ancient Mesopotamia? I doubt it. So what is it about this story that seems to last and last and last? Maybe a lot like Star Wars. Let's read the story a little bit, starting down in verse 9 of chapter 6. This is the account of Noah and his family. And Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. So Noah, he's a pretty upright guy. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, to show you in contrast why that's a big deal that Noah is righteous, and he's a pretty upstanding guy, verse 11 tells us the context. Now, the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways. So God said to Noah, I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth. Now, before we come into the remedy here, what we want to stop and say, even earlier, is talking about how God had created things perfectly, and it doesn't take very long, right, for humans to come along and mess it up. Isn't that the story of our lives? Right? You get married, you think there's this paradise, there's this Eden that happens for about 6 minutes. I was going to say months, didn't I? But then what happens? Well, we forget that we weren't supposed to bring our selfishness with us into that relationship. We forgot we're not supposed to bring our insecurities into that relationship. We forget that we were supposed to leave behind the pain and struggle maybe that we had from our families of origin into that relationship. So we show up with a lot of baggage, right? And what happens is we come in and we bring this perfect order. We look at this marriage, this relationship, or maybe it's a friendship, or it's a new boyfriend-girlfriend relationship for you, or maybe it's a new job. Okay, I want to make this ancient story. I want to understand it anciently, but I want you to apply it very modern. You get a new job, and everything's going good, but then what happens? Oh, you realize you're bringing the junk with you, or you realize someone else in the next cubicle has brought their junk with them. And what happens? What seems orderly and good kind of start falling apart, right? That's a good definition for sin. The Bible defines sin as missing the mark, and it really is in its original language, it was a language used by archers. You can go up to Cunha up here, right? There's the archery, and you can practice. I think it's kind of funny. It's on a hill right above the swimming pool. I hope they're good shots, you know. You're swimming laps and all of a sudden you get hit by something. But the word that's used there is to miss the mark. You're missing what you're shooting for. I'm trying for goodness. I'm trying for justice. I'm trying for what's right. I'm trying to be selfless. I'm trying to be generous. And I miss the mark. I think another great definition of sin is creating disorder in your relationships, in your families. How's life at home whenever people bring their disorder and chaos to the house? It doesn't work, does it? Some of you were shaking your heads. You didn't know you were shaking your heads, did you? Because it's what? It's stressful, and it's anxious, and it's a problem, and then people get angry. Then we say things that we shouldn't say that are ugly. And what happens? Chaos gets planted, and then chaos just grows, right? Like weeds. You don't have to cultivate chaos. Have you figured that out? It's like a garden. I never figured that out. How come you can plant tomatoes and you have to work to get those things to grow? But you don't have to plant weeds and they're going to grow on their own. Is that because you're planting a tomato garden and then so what you don't want pops up there? You know, and if that's true, I'm thinking, what if I planted a weed garden? Would tomato plants pop up, you know, and then grow? But that's the way good and bad is, isn't it? Good you have to cultivate. Good you have to work at. And not doing good is creating chaos or sin. Doing bad is creating chaos or sin. So as we read through the ancient story, even right now, I'm flipping this around in my head. Because I want you to not go, okay, yeah, get the story, then the children's story, what's the point for today? So let me ask you a few questions up front. The modern questions up front. I want you to apply this in a few areas. One is to your financial ethic. What I mean by ethic is how you view your finances, how you behave regarding money and finances and material things. What word characterizes your financial life? Chaos or order? Are things a wreck and shambles? And if you have the train on the track, is it just always teetering and at every turn it's about to fall over? And you kind of make it, we hit it this month. But hey, is there something? Now sometimes those things come from outside. I'm not talking about those things. I'm talking about the ones from internal. Is chaos or order the best word to describe the financial ethic? I also want to ask you about your sexual ethic. Now let's keep in mind, Christians really like, especially recently, right? We like to make sexual sin the biggest sin ever. And really when you look in the beginning of the story, it's not sexual sin, it's violence. It's Cain murdering Abel early in Genesis. Here, he says it's so violent and every thought of every human was wicked. And because it was violence, that was the issue there. But still, I would ask, what's your sexual ethic? What does the world say about how to behave sexually and what do you do with this great prize? And some would say, well, hey, between consenting adults, we shouldn't have any regulation, right? And what I like to say is yeah, because that always works. Never once has two people hooked up, right, early in a relationship and shared themselves sexually with one another, and then the relationship doesn't quite work out because they didn't promise to be with each other no matter what. So when hard times come, or the pixie dust starts to settle, you get past the 6-minute mark, and then you say, this isn't working out, so one of them backs out of the relationship, and the other person always says, no problem. I still like you. Can we still just be friends? It doesn't matter that we go to church together. It won't be awkward seeing each other at church. That's how it always works, right? No. What happens is that, there's these guardrails that God puts around our financial ethic or our sexual ethic. And what he's saying is what? Don't bring chaos. Don't bring disorder into this relationship. Keep it in order. Keep it in order. How many parents have to arrange it with the kids' mom or dad to see them? And you understand. I'm not preaching at you. You're the one who can preach this better than me. Going, amen. It brings chaos. Don't get it out of order, right? So what is sin? It's bringing disorder into your finances, into your sexual ethic, into your families, into violence. Violence. Oh, does it bother you that there are times when your preacher realizes there is a demon inside of him, that if you let it completely go unrestrained and unreined, he could do some violence. There's a couple mopeds in my neighborhood. I could run over those two guys and not feel very guilty at my worst. Thankfully, the Lord has held me back, right? So what's your ethic in these areas of life? In your job, are you the one that brings peace? Blessed are the peacemakers, Jesus taught. Or are you the one that's always bringing the drama? Are you the drama mama of the office? No one likes that. And if you don't like it, I get it. Because it's not fun to do. It's actually happening inside of you, right? Are you like me? Do you struggle with that inner anxiety? And when it bubbles up and it spills over, what happens? Rarely, that's an understatement, never does the expression of anxiety or stress create order. In my home, in my own emotions, in my finances, at work, right? So what's God up to here in this story? Let's tell the story. Noah was a righteous man. No one else was righteous. Every thought was evil. Everything was violent. Verse 14, God says, Noah, so make yourself an ark of cypress wood. I know the way the version I read as a kid was gopher wood, right? It's unsure. We're unsure what that word actually means. But make it out of cypress wood. Make rooms in it and coat it with pitch, kind of as tar, right? Inside and out. This is how you are to build it. And he goes on to give the instructions, right? Now, depending on how you put what you're reading from, it's going to convert these things. For example, the ark will be 300 cubits long. I used to not like it. Say, come on, translate that into modern for us, right? That's about 450 feet. But a cubit is the length from the elbow to your longest finger. Now, obviously, some of your cubits are longer or shorter than my cubit, right? And there's some stuff in the New Testament where Jesus says, hey, don't cheat people. Because what would happen is, if you worked for me, if I was buying cloth from someone and I bought it by the cubit, I'm thinking, let's see, I need Albert's cubit, I need Roy's cubit. Hey, come, I want to get my money's worth, right? But if I'm selling cloth, I'd be like, let's see, Riley, can I use your cubit for a moment? It's about this long, right? Okay? And so I used to like that, translate that into, because 450 feet, that's about a football field and a half. That's a big ship. This is big, right? And I think that's the point. It's not about, was it really 450 feet, or was it, how long is a cubit? No, we're asking the wrong, that's a modern question. It was big. I think they were sitting around the campfire going, it was so big. Oh, how big was it? Oh, it was 300 cubits. Here, run out there, 300 cubits. It was huge. That was the point of describing it. And he describes then, he gives these instructions about the width and the height. He says, put a roof on it. He even says, leave a little room below the roof as an opening, right? Because it's going to smell in the ark and you want some ventilation going on there. He doesn't say that, but that's why he gave the instruction. Put a door in the middle of it. And what's interesting, now this is your homework, okay? Because sometimes we go back to the story of Noah as someone who was obedient. And it's something that's repeated in the story. And Noah did exactly, he was obedient to what God told him. He was obedient to God told him. Not if, but when. You go read this later this week, you'll see, oh wow, there it is again. There it is, he was obedient. And there was a relationship between him, God calling him righteous, and his constant, persistent, consistent obedience to God. But sometimes we'll look back on this and we'll support what I call patternism. And God gave him a pattern to build the ark, and he followed it exactly. And I want to say, well, except for the window that he let the bird out of. Was that an unauthorized window? He's lucky God just didn't sink the boat right then, right? Now granted, maybe you got this 18 inches here between the top of the wall and the roof and of the boat. Maybe that was the window. So what he says is in verse 17, I'm going to destroy everything with a flood. You've never seen a flood, but I'm going to bring water from the ground and water from the sky. Remember back to creation, just a few chapters back. What did God do? He put some of the water, he says, hey, water, you behave. You get up here in the sky, and hey, the rest of you water, you get down here in the ocean. And so you have water in the sky and water's in the ocean. And God says, I'm going to open up those floodgates from both sides. Verse 22, Noah did everything just as God commanded, righteousness. So the Lord said to Noah, get into the ark. Now I'm going to tell the rest of the story for time's sake around the campfire. Right? He says, Noah, get into the ark. And so he's in the ark a few days, and they're preparing, and God says, God, close the door. That's a big door, right? But remember, he also said, hey, go and collect. I'm going to preserve. We're starting over. We're starting over here. So go out and call in 2 of every kind of animal, load them onto the ark. Every bird and every mammal, fish will be okay, but every bird and mammal, you load them into the ark, right? You see the painting. And there's a special classification of animals, the clean ones, that we're going to have to eat or sacrifice when we're done. Bring 7 of those, a male and female. Even that's kind of sketchy. Is that 14? 7 of those, male and female? Or is that 7 individuals? And so you have what? Modern question. When you ask the modern question, you miss the ancient point. So in verse 11, in the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the 2nd month, that's pretty specific, isn't it? On that day, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened, and rain fell on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. Was that a literal 40 days and 40 nights? Long question. Maybe. Certainly could have been. But you understand, if you understand the ancient literature, these numbers are important. 3 means things that are whole and complete, or perfection. 7 is a completeness. 40 is kind of the completeness of a certain period of time, which would fit both literally and metaphorically. And so he brings all this forth, and in verse 17, for 40 days the flood kept coming onto the earth, and the waters increased and lifted the ark high above the earth. It said it flooded it so much that it went up to 20 feet above the highest peak or mountain in the area. So you understand, sitting around the campfire, people's eyes are big, and wow, what happened? And there's these details of what goes on, and it goes on, and in verse 8, but God remembered Noah. Now, it's not that he didn't forget Noah. In the Hebrew, what the word means there, he took notice of him again, and he acted because he hadn't forgotten Noah. And I hope you see, again, even as we're reading the story, yes, God has not forgotten you. Are you in the middle of a flood? Are you in the middle of a crazy, chaotic, stormy chapter in your life? God has not forgotten you. He is providing a way out through the ark and through his instruction. You focus on being righteous. God will see you through the storm. So what happens then, and again, around the campfire, what else? What happened next? What happened next, Uncle? And they would have said, well, then he had to test and see if the land was coming forth. So he sent out a bird through this unauthorized window, and he sent out this bird, and it came back, and it told Noah, oh, there must be nowhere for it to land. So he waited a little longer, a complete period of time, 7 days, the text says. He sends it out again, and it doesn't come back. Or it actually brings back a little leaf. Oh, there's enough dry land out there that the bird found a tree and it came back. And so they let the water subside, and the door is open, and the animals come out. Noah and his family take take in a deep breath of finally some fresh air. The ark is a lot like church. I can figure this out. Church isn't perfect. And sometimes the only thing that makes the smell inside tolerable is the storm outside. When life gets rough in the church, you go, oh, what? I'm going to go out there? This is where it's at. This is where we love each other, where we sometimes tolerate each other, but at best we love one another. As you get toward the end, it says the mountain, the ark rested on a mountain. And from time to time, archaeologists think they found it, right? We found this huge wooden thing up in these mountains, and it's always unsure, and so it's unclear. And you think, wow, nice story, but what's that have to do with me? Now, I hope are you engaging the text? Are you engaging the story? Because the story is an ancient story. We can't ask only modern questions. See, modern questions would do this, right? What? Engineers would ask, a 500-foot wooden boat, is that structurally sound? Now, of course, with God working, it can be. But you can actually research the largest wooden ship of history. And it's not nearly that long. And they worked on it. They thought it was an engineering marvel. And when they set it out on its maiden voyage, it went out 100 yards and broke in half. And that's relatively modern times. I don't remember the date specifically. So with all of the engineering there, but then here's this 450-foot boat that goes out onto the sea. Engineers ask that question, is that a feasible boat? Wrong question. Zoologist asks, well, how many, can you fit that number of species onto this 3-decker ark? How many species were there at that time? And could you have gotten 2 of everyone? And what did you do with the giraffes? Maybe there's something true, right? And then all the nursery pictures, the giraffe's head is out the window. Again, that unauthorized window. Archaeologists ask, where's the boat? And they go out and looking on Mount Ararat, there in modern-day Turkey, and they look for the remains of that. It wouldn't surprise me one day if they find something. Geologists ask, is that a worldwide flood or a regional flood? And a lot of smart people have debated that for a long time, and some debate it. There's things in the text that point one way or the other. There's things in archaeology or in geology that point one way or the other. I've actually been in the Philippines. Some of you know Lake Toba. And Lake Toba is a lake that has filled in at the top of a volcano crater. Far, far, far above sea level. I'm not saying that's proof, I'm just saying, I don't know, how did all that water get up there? It's not wide enough for it to catch as a basin and roll into there. How did that water get there? And I don't know enough, I've not researched it enough to see, oh, there's other springs or the other mentions of that. But there are things that point to that. In the Black Sea, now I'm really stepping outside of my any claim of knowledge. In the Black Sea, but they're doing some excavating of the ocean floor there, and what they're finding is that if you go down, there's this thin layer of sediment, and you find there it's salt water. You get saltwater clams and saltwater shells that are there because it's a body of salt water. But if you go down and you dig down with like kind of this drill, and you go down and you take a big sample, several feet deep, that you get just a few inches under the saltwater layer, there's all of these freshwater clam shells. How did that get there? So again, but what's happening even right now? You see, my modern mind, I'm interested in that. I'm not saying it's not interesting. I'm not saying it's not important. If you're a geologist or an archaeologist, those are the questions you ask. Accountants will ask. 7 clean or 7 clean animals and 2 of every unclean animals. How does that fit? How do you work that, right? Insurance agents ask, do you have flood insurance? But those are modern questions of an ancient story. And here's what I want to suggest. Dr. John Walton, professor of Old Testament history, he suggests that maybe one of the things we're looking for here, that the story was told, why it was valuable, was because it was a story just like creation, just like Cain and Abel. Here you come to the 3rd story of the flood, and there are stories that follow that is kind of repeating this thing until it gets into our heads. God is a God of order, not disorder. The story of creation is what? We want to wrestle about 24-hour days and no, it is God, a creative person, a force, a being behind it all. And he says, I want order, because order is where you will thrive and be blessed. Let me take a quick poll. How many of you are, there's kind of 2 different personalities, right? Some of you are organizers. You like your shirts color-coded in alphabetical order. Others of you are like, let me dig through the laundry basket for my clean shirt. Okay, so I'm going to take a poll. How many of you are the first type? You want things organized, you like things in a certain place, all right? Look around, never take one of these people as your roommate. Okay? How many of you are on the opposite end of that spectrum, right? Okay, right? Okay? Look around, never have one of these as your children. The good news is it only lasts 18, 20 years, right? And they can go make their own place messy. But what are we having? Now, I'm not trying to say, oh, therefore you're ungodly. But I think what we're having in the text is what? In creation, God puts things in order. If you look at Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, he's hovering over. What was happening? There was chaos. There was darkness. And what does God do? He sits back and goes, let's see. Mountains over here, land over here. Oh, someone left a pine tree in Arizona. Let me move it back up to Northern California. Okay, there you go. And he puts things in order. And every day he sits back and goes, wow, that's good. That's good. You know what happens? Adam and Eve come, and the story goes that representative of all humanity, they come and they bring disorder. Well, yeah, everything's really good, but I want to do things my way, so they mess it up, right? Do you do that? Do you do that financially, with your sexual ethic, in your words, at work, in your family? Because it creates disorder, and God doesn't want that for you. You know, it robs you of blessing, doesn't it? Because then you're stressed and you're anxious and you do things you wish you didn't do. And so what Dr. Walton says is, the story is just repeating, one of the things it's doing is repeating this idea of order. God brings order, we bring disorder, and God is reordering. What happens here? God says, okay, you know what, I got this whole garden thing worked out. You know, you're here, you can't eat from this tree. You go out, follow me. What happens? Violence and problems and stress. They're bringing disorder and chaos to life, into the whole world. The whole world got so chaotic. God says, I'm going to have to start over again. The good news is, if you're in the middle of chaos, even if it's your fault, if you're the agent of the parasite of chaos into different areas of your life, God doesn't quit on you. You see that? At creation, He creates, and there's disorder, and He recreates. At the flood, there's order, then there's disorder, and then God is reordering. God wants to reorder your life. He wants there to be a certain peace and a calmness. You know the name Noah, if you go back into chapter 5, it is the second most boring chapter in the Bible. The first being Matthew chapter 1, which is also a list of genealogies. This is the public Bible reader's worst nightmare. When someone asks the preacher, what's the day's scripture reading? I'm the reader today. He said, I want you to read Matthew chapter 1, because it has all these names that you have no clue of pronouncing, okay? And I'll tell you the trick, if you just say it very forcefully, like you know what you're talking about, everyone goes, oh, that's how you say that. So in Genesis chapter 5, there's this genealogy there. And what happens is that in each of those, I think you're going to see the story of order and disorder, sin, and then God reordering things. And so you come here, and that's what's happening again. So you see, that's the point, one of the points of the story. That's why you look at it anciently. And so then we have to begin applying it to our lives. You have to ask the questions we were asking earlier. So several points from this, and I want you to dig, and I want you to be someone who gets dirty trying to understand what's God trying to say through these stories. So some of the things might be that God is interested. God cares. When things get chaotic, whenever you sin against someone, God cares. It brings chaos. When someone hurts you, God cares. He's not disinterested. He's not this distant God that wound the world, the universe tight and then set it off and is just on its own now. He's right there, and he's communicating with Noah and the humans, and he's saying, hey, I'm going to help you out of this situation. I'm going to bring order back to this. Whether it's your fault or not, I want to reorder life for you. You understand that none of their focus is on the afterlife yet. That's actually a relatively new idea when you look at biblical history. When they talked about life and order, they weren't saying just hang on for someday. Certainly that's the ultimate. But it was more about right now, in your families, in your work, in your finances, in your relationships. God is interested. Know that. He's interested. He cares. He wants to be intimate with you and interact with you. Here's this 3 steps, and I'll end with a question. So one, God is a God that creates. We've seen that out of Genesis. We see it again. He's recreating order here in this story. He's starting over, and it's interesting. He uses water to do that. That's his eraser. That's his cleaning. That's his, hey, let's start over. A great foreshadowing of the role that water and baptism would play. So God creates, He desires, He intends order in your life. If you look at most of the problems in your life, the things that are stressing you out, you'll agree that it's about chaos that has been brought in to your life. Stress that has been brought in to your life. I want you to know, that's not where God has created you to thrive. The second step, of course, is like Adam and Eve, like Cain, like the people of Noah's time, we bring disorder to that order. we mess things up, right? We make stress in all the areas of our lives. Know that God is reordering those things. Don't let it just be an ancient Bible story now. He's in your life. He cares. He's interested. What are the things that constantly bring stress and anxiety in your life? God wants to help guide that and reorder it. So the question is, which side are you on? You have to make a directional decision, right? Which side are you helping create? In the very biggest ways of this question, in this world, are you a proponent of violence or of peace? Are you someone who moves forward with a certain sexual ethic that says, no, that's beautiful and valuable, and I'm not going to steal that from you, and I'm not going to give it away to you until we live within where God says, hey, here's where that's safe. Are you someone who has a handle on finances and your hunger and your desire to want things? Or does that desire kind of run roughshod over you and it gets you in financial problems and it causes stress? Your family relationships, what are you bringing? Order or chaos? Do your words, your attitudes, behavior bring order or chaos? Your relationships, your church relationships, your job relationships, your relationships with people in the world, order or chaos? What side are you participating on? I mentioned already that it's interesting that water is what God uses in the story to hey, let's start over. Do you understand that's still true today? A guy named Peter, one of Jesus' apostles, followers, he writes in one of his letters named after him, 1 Peter, and he references the Noah story, and he likens it very much to baptism, that through the water, God saved him through the water. That if you're about to drown, it'd be nice of me for me to say, I'd like to save you from the water, right? But if you're about to drown, you know what I'd like to do? Is hold you under. Because in Scripture, water is not something bad, it's something good, it's something that saves. It literally, we're about to sing a song, it flows from Jesus. I believe it's the Gospel of John. This is just coming to my mind, so I didn't come prepared to share it. I hope it's an accurate end of God, end of this thought. That as Jesus hangs on the cross, it says that one of the soldiers comes and pierces his side, and it says blood and water burst forth. No one. Medical people can tell you that soon after death, as the water, the blood starts to separate, and so there's some understanding of that scientifically. But also, when you follow through the entire Gospel of John, there's this theme of water. Water that saves, and water that cleanses, and water that starts over. And one of the story, water's at the well. Jesus says way before his death, you know what, if you knew who I was, you'd be asking me for real water. And you'll never get thirsty once you drink this one. And he was kind of alluding to this Old Testament passage where it says that on the foundation of the rock, there will be water will come forth. And even today, devout Jews on the Feast of Tabernacles, it's one of their celebration weeks, okay, that they observe, that they will go and they will pour a cup of water on the foundation of the symbolic altar there. Because they understand that in the Old Testament there's this prophecy that one day from the foundation of the rock will come forth living water. And what John understands is, they thought that was a rock under the altar. Jesus is the rock. And so it would be so fitting. I think he's the only gospel writer that puts that in. Why? Because he's trying to complete his theme about water. That where does water flow from? Jesus is the one from which that water flows. So whether it's saving you through the storms and the chaos that we bring, be on the side of order. That's your righteousness. That's your obedience. Are you doing things that's creating chaos? God wants to help you stop that. But ultimately, where does this living water come from? And that's Jesus. And as you connect with him, and as you learn his way, that he orders things in your life, and the chaos and the anxiety and the peace that should come into our lives begins to come. The name Noah, probably in the Hebrew, is Noach. And it's kind of a play off this word. It even can mean itself rest, peace. It comes from order. When things are in order, right, you can kind of rest. That's what God is doing with us and for us. Understand that God is still doing that today. Jared and Charles, you guys come up, and we're going to sing this song. Again, a new song. The chorus is one that you'll be able to find. And sing this, claiming Jesus is that river. Let's stand and sing.